Well, here we are, 2020. It's been a while since the 3rd of December, but we're back on the YouTube. I've been doing things, so everybody's been doing things. And obviously everybody's talking about the current disasters, the current bushfires emergency, and some people are talking about a climate emergency, some people are denying a climate emergency. The reality is it doesn't matter what you believe, it's the reality on the ground that's important. And what's important in Australian society over the last 5 to 10 years is the increasing severity and frequency of natural disasters, whether it's cyclones, whether it's bushfires, whether it's other disasters, whether they're human-induced or not human-induced. We have a problem as a community. And I think anybody who's watched the response to the fires down the southeast coast of Australia would be horrified by the piecemeal, indecisive approach to the issue by the federal government, which has the majority of resources because it's the only level of government that has the power to levy income tax, which is the major revenue source across the country. And seeing the Prime Minister, Mr Morrison, flounder when faced with his first test as Prime Minister, you really understand that what the Australian people have voted into power is an advertising executive. But they actually didn't vote him into power. They voted Liberal National Party into power, and the Liberal Party elected him as their leader. So indecisive, incompetent. And the thing is, you don't need to be that way. It looked like they were racing around trying to brush up milk from a broken milk bottle. We all know there's no point brushing up milk from a broken milk bottle. The reality is, we are on a continent. There's not many of us. There's 25 million people, although some people say that's too many. We are on a continent, and we will have more disasters. And the government at the federal level and the state level, in the majority of cases, is poorly equipped to deal with the new reality. And this is the new reality. I think this will be the word for 2020, the new reality. So a government's primary responsibility, apart from keeping those in power, which is number one function, its second function is to protect its citizens from foreign aggression and local disasters. Now, this government isn't very good at protecting its citizens, especially the 30% who are on social security benefits and members of trade unions who are treated as criminals, but it now has to make a pretense of actually looking after people. And it's instituted these programs via which to distribute funds, look after people's mental health needs, and those people who've been through natural disasters like I have in the past will know that it's a lot of garbage at the end of the day. So what do we need today, and how do we finance it? That's the issue for me. I don't want to stand here in 2020 and complain and carp and be a cringing, carping, complaining consumer. I want to be here in 2020. I want to be an active, concerned citizen. And active, concerned citizens try to extend the debate about the response to natural disasters which we face with an increasing frequency over the next decade or so. So the first thing I'd like to see is the establishment of 50 disaster response centres across Australia. The state governments would provide the land, the territory governments would provide the land, and the federal government would provide the resources. And the idea of a disaster response centre is that you have everything in place, including a skeleton staff, to activate a disaster response when a disaster happens in that region. You could allocate $5 billion initially from consolidated revenue, $100 million for each centre to establish the centre, and then ongoing funding for disaster management. You could actually introduce a 1% stock market turnover tax. All those people who now get franking credits, they get money from the government for owning stocks and shares, gift from you and me to stockholders and shareholders, would mean they would actually be contributing to the welfare of the Australian people and the Australian nation by paying 1%, that's right, 1%, 1 cent in every dollar, every time they actually buy or sell a share and you can raise between $20 to $50 billion per year. If you put this money in a special disaster relief fund and then use that money collected over the years to assist people who are affected by natural disasters, whether they're due to a climate emergency, whether it's an act of God, whether it's an act of nature, it doesn't really matter. What matters at the end of the day is how we deal with the response. Obviously, we need to deal with the consequence of a climate emergency, increased CO2 emissions, but on the ground practically how to deal with the situation to assist people. If you've got $20 to $40 billion sitting in a fund we collect every year, that's a significant amount of resources to assist people. Because we need to remember that 80% of Australians are underinsured, and many Australians are not insured because their homes are not insurable or they don't have the resources to insure them. Now, I was involved in a major fire in 1990, and although we had insurance, and we were very lucky to have insurance because we didn't get any government grants, no politician knocked on our door and phoned us up to see how we were. We didn't get a cent from anybody. If we weren't insured, we would have been in a diabolical situation, because the trouble is when your house burns down, the bills still come. The mortgage repayments are required, the rates need to be paid, the water rates need to be paid, and the list goes on and on. And if you're not insured in those days, you even had to pay for the fire brigade turning up. So luckily we were insured, but it still took about a decade to get over it economically and financially. So a lot of these people have lost their homes, lost their livelihoods, lost mechanisms. They are finding themselves in dire consequences today. And I can assure you, although the major banks have donated between $1 to $2 million each towards the bushfire relief fund, which is nothing when you make a profit of $6 to $8 billion per year, they will still charge interests on the mortgages and expect mortgage repayments every month from everybody in this country whose house has burnt down. So why don't we look at the banking sector, the financial sector, suspending repayments and suspending interest on loans for a 3-year period for anybody whose house has been burnt down in a bushfire? Why don't we look at that? Or whose house is lost through a cyclone, or houses lost through an earthquake, or a tsunami, or some type of disaster, whether it's human-made or not human-made. So that's the reality that we face every day. So instead of talking about charity and people big-noting themselves because they've lots of money and giving $1 million into a bushfire relief fund, why don't we talk about the government actually having a responsibility for its citizens by establishing disaster resources centres, by introducing a new tax, a 1% stock market turnover tax, to fund the disaster resource centres, 50 centres across the country, and also have money in reserve to look after people, whether insured or not insured, after disasters, whether they're due to a climate emergency, whether they're due to somebody's stupidity, whether they're due to an act of God or an act of nature. And that's the key. It's not about talking about volunteerism, which is a stopgap measure. It's not about talking about private charity, which is a stopgap measure. It's not about talking about the fact that, climate change exists or doesn't exist. You can deny it, but the reality is reality. And if all the facts point in one direction, most sane people move in that direction. Not that we expect everybody to move in that direction. Because what I found funny being in the fire-affected districts in Kosciuszko National Parks and centres around Kosciuszko National Park in the last 2 weeks was this: how many people were blaming the greenies for the fires? Not a climate emergency, not climate change, but the greenies, because they didn't allow the undergrowth to be burnt. Quite extraordinary. So there is a lot of misinformation about that. So a disaster resource centre would also provide a mechanism by which to put out real information about what's going on. Currently, there are bots on the virtual world which are saying it's all been lit, by arsonists. It's a load of garbage. Big fires create their own climate. They create lightning. I've seen it. I was there. I saw it. So, in summary, Governments are essentially there to protect the interests of the ruling classes, those who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. They do pretend to be there to protect the interests of people, especially in a parliamentary democracy where people vote every 3 to 4 years. So, two things I'd like to reiterate is one...
Can you say that again? Two things I'd like to reiterate?
Two things I'd like to reiterate. One, we need the establishment of 50 disaster response centres across the country. These are centres that will be partially staffed but full of resources which will be ready to respond to a disaster, whether it's a climate emergency disaster, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's a so-called act of God. They will be there ready to respond on the day, not 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days later in a piecemeal fashion, but in a coordinated fashion. The land would be provided by the state governments and territory governments. They would have interaction with the national government, which would actually fund the centre and be responsible for the centre. The centre would have coordinating staff with all the state instrumentalities that deal with disasters, ranging from police force to rural fire services, to state emergency services, to medical facilities. You would fund this initially through consolidated revenue, $5 billion to set up 50 $100 million centres. Then you would introduce a 1% stock market tax at the same time. That tax would raise $20 to $50 billion per year to actually look after the needs of people who are affected by these disasters. And thirdly, I'm reiterating third point, all financial institutions which have loans owed to them by people who've lost their homes or their businesses, that these financial institutions are by law required to suspend all repayments and all interest payments for a 3-year period as part of their contribution to the welfare of this country. So think about it. The debate's not finished, it's only beginning. They'd like you to think that it's just a matter of rebuilding. It's not a matter of rebuilding, it's a matter of actually having a plan to deal with the increasing disasters that which will occur on this continent and the rest of the world as a result of the climate emergency, which is due to the domination of the world economy by an economic system which is based on the creation of ever-increasing profits, irrespective of the human, social, environmental and national costs. You have an economic system that dominates the planet, that demands increasing profits every year, irrespective of the cost. This is what happens. So it's not only about a social revolution, it's also about today governments being forced to put in place measures which address these issues and to get those people who profit from this economic system, like the financial sector, like the mining sector, to contribute through a 1% stock market turnover tax. Thank you for listening. Next week, who knows what will be on my mind? And it won't be zucchinis.